absolutely wild as Verne Gagne's all-star wrestling goes coast to coast and continent to continent. The greatest wrestlers in the world.
He may be an apprentice carpenter, but I guarantee you he is a seasoned ring veteran.
I've been hit with bar stools, bar rags, barmaids.
I'm talking to you.
They're scared that Hulkamania's still running wild. Oh, yeah. I got a big fat wife and 9 kids at home, and I gotta feed them.
And take a look at Jesse the Body in real life.
Open your hand once if you would.
You want to see it?
This is absolutely unbelievable. Totally, completely out of control.
He's coming in over the top. Hey! Look out!
Hey, welcome into the AWA Unleashed podcast. We like to call ourselves the preeminent podcast dedicated to telling the stories and reliving the memories of everybody's favorite 3-state promotion, the American Wrestling Association. As you see on the screen, if you're watching, my name is Chris Tubbs. If you're not watching, you can hear my voice. My name is Chris Tubbs. You can see that man on the screen. His name is Polish Joe. He's not saying anything yet, but he will. And along with that man, he is Slick Mick Karch. He will also be saying things when prompted.
Screw the prompting. I got an issue. 3-state promotion?
It's what I've been told. It's what the kids are saying.
They're wrong. Wrong.
Nope. You're cruising for a bruising, pal. All right. How we doing?
We're doing really well, and I love these Q&As, and we got some fun questions today, so let's do it.
Did you already retire the hat? I mean, is it like a one and done?
No. What happened was the hat tends to run a little bit small, and with my Boris Zukov-like noggin, I put the hat on and it exploded. I pulled a little too tight, and I mean, there was fibers and everything else going all over the place. So, I'll probably have to order another one. So that'll be our second sale this year.
Oh, well, I feel like you were trying to talk about yourself using a condom and not a hat, but nevertheless.
No, that's too big.
I was giving you credit.
Yeah, I know.
Arnold
Palmer, you should have seen him. I love women. But that Arnie, he was, oh, man.
It's a par wow. All right, we'll get into it here in a minute, guys. But first,
let the shilling begin.
Of course, we've got the shilling. We're at the 3-minute mark. So let's go to the 4-minute and 47-second mark in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, first of all, we do have our AWA Unleashed Patreon, the pinfall level. You get this a day early, which is always kind of fun because you can brag to your friends, hey, I get the podcast early and you don't because I'm better than you are. But if you don't want it early, then don't worry about it. If you want access to our watch-alongs, which are fun because it's Mystery Science Theater 3000 meets the three of us goofballs talking about wrestling, that's cool. We've got really good things. I love it. I think it's a lot of fun, honestly. The watch-alongs, they are just an incredible amount of enjoyment. Because just like everything else, we don't know what's going to be said or how it's going to be said. Second, you do get a letter along with a magnet and a sticker from me, just kind of a thank you. And it's not one of these, pre-typed out letters. I actually write it and get it in the mail to you. You get a 5-pack of pictures from Mick Karch as well. And then you also get access to our special Patreon exclusive interviews. Ken Anderson. We've had Herb Simmons. We've had James Beard. We've got some other ones coming up as well. We also do have the TeePublic as well. Oh, we do have the live chats once a month that you can. Yeah. It's kind of an exclusive, hour that you get us for anything you want. TeePublic.com/user Unleashed Plus Slick Mick merchandise. You can get an AWA Unleashed hat if you want to buy the second one. If you want to buy the second, I'm a Slick Mick guy mug like I do. There it is in 3, 2. And 1. Absolutely. I kiss a lot of depth perception. Okay. Depth perception.
I was thinking about how you shilled our getting the podcast a day early. Don't you think maybe some of our members will call and warn people? you know, that they've seen it the day before and call it, you know what, if you got something else to do, you got to close the refrigerator door or something. You know, it's
spoilers are going to be all over the internet. Hey, guess what happens in this week? Somebody's going to tell the Wrestling Observer or Mike Johnson, or that's what I should do. Is I should just email Mike and just be like, you guys, you know, somebody can email Wade. I'll email Mike and Meltzer. It'll be like,
yeah. Breaking news. They talked about a match from 40 years ago.
Yeah. And you know what else? They got the date wrong. They messed up, you know.
Okay. So Bill Apter, Tom Burr. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, we're having fun here, guys.
We are.
Let's go ahead and get into the no DQ&A, and this is one that we've got. You know, people, when we do these, we do have questions that have a tendency to get carried over. So we've tried before at the beginning where it's like we got to get all of them in, and then we're like, well, wait a minute, this isn't a match. We don't have to get all of our shit in. Right? Like we have the ability to transfer.
Lapse time 6 minutes. 6 minutes.
Do it yourself. Go for it.
I'm the timekeeper.
Yeah, now what do we do? Anyway, there he is.
Oh, it's a shame my internet came back.
Yeah.
All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to answer. We've got a handful of questions here that we're going to answer. And if you have a question that you do want answered, send it to AWA Unleashed podcast at gmail.com. I don't take the things on social media just because it's so hard for me to go back and grab something out of a thread when there's just like tons and tons of comments. It is like trying to find a needle in a haystack. So if you have a question, a comment, anything, you can DM me the comments. But if you got any questions or whatnot, please, AW Unleashed podcast at gmail.com. We ready to go?
Ready to go.
Let's do it.
Okay. The first question that we've got is kind of one that we've gotten over really the last couple of years, and it's kind of coming up more and more. We're asked about certain talent and getting them on the podcast. And why won't we pay for interviews? Here's my thought on that. I've been in the media business for 25 years. I've been a producer. I've been a host. I've been television. I've been radio. I've been podcast. I'm not sitting here telling you guys my resume to put myself over. What I'm saying is I have interviewed a lot of people in and around just sports and non-sports, from Charles Barkley to Shaquille O'Neal to Jerry Rice to Miley Cyrus. I have never, ever paid for an interview. I never have. And I never will, because I have gotten a chance to talk to these individuals, and if they don't want to come on because we're not going to pay them, that's fine. To each their own. It's a business decision. I totally understand that. If they're like, hey, you know what? I want $5,000 or I'm not going to come on. Hey, that's cool. You know, I respect that. You know, everybody's out here trying to make a living. But when I've had access to all of these high profile athletes, not to diminish the people that are asking for money, I'm not going to diminish that. But I have a hard time justifying paying for an interview when in my line of work, it's just part of what I do for my shoot job. So that's my answer. It's not a matter of disrespecting them, and I'm not offended. I'm not bothered. I understand why, but I don't ever feel the need to pay for an interview. It's like we're giving you a platform. We're giving you an opportunity to reach maybe an audience that is anxious to hear from you, people that have not heard from you, that are fans. You're reaching people that you might not have always have been able to. So we look at that as you know, wanting to be a mutually beneficial relationship.
Well said. And, you know, we've talked about it before, too. Some of these people are writing books, or they put out an interview, or they're going to be in a movie or something. and we're giving them a platform to promote that, and they can promote it all day long. We don't.
It's a pitch. It's a pitch.
Absolutely.
They're pitching what they have, and we get that from this side. We get that.
Yeah. Yep, no doubt about it. And, you know, we run into some people that think they're worth a lot more than they really are. And, you know, we won't mention any names, but, yeah, no, there's a lot of podcasts out there. And if somebody wants to pay you, that's great.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're kind of a low budget operation here anyway.
No,
you know,
really?
Yeah. I mean, you know, not crying the blues about that, but it's just like, hey, you know what? We're the only ones that are doing a podcast like this. And you're one of the handful of AWA representatives, whoever it might be, that's still out there.
You're going to be featured on this.
Absolutely.
I feel like sometimes these individuals, you're going to be a small part of something else, whereas here, the focus is going to be on you. The focus is on your time in the AWA. The focus is on that. If that's not something that you want, that's cool. Again,
right.
This isn't a passive aggressive comment.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, no hard feelings, no hard.
No, not at all. Not at all.
You know, go make your money. Anyway, okay, let's do it.
But things could possibly change. Let's say we suddenly get 1,000 subscribers to sign up a month. Okay, maybe, you know, we spend $100 or a couple $100 on somebody. The truth and the reality is this show operates in the red. We don't. We're not in this to make a shit ton of money. Hey, if it happens, great. But the reality is, we're three guys who love the AWA. For Mick and I mean, we grew up with it longer than Chris did, but Chris is a fan of the AWA. We do this because we love. Well, I'll speak for myself. I love telling the stories and talking about the AWA. And
I love hearing it.
20, well, not 20, it'd be 30, 40, even 50 years ago, talking about everything from what I remember in my childhood of the AWA, my teen years, and then my time working in it, and then even after it. So to spend $300, $400, $500, whatever it is that some of these wrestlers are asking for, is not in our budget. Now, this is not a pitch, you know, for, hey, we need to have 1,000 new subscribers. If that happens, great. We'll see, you know, how the show expands. But the reality is, we're doing this for fun. At least I.
Yeah, and I'm kind of surprised that we don't have more subscribers, frankly, because of the response that we've gotten to this. And this is not, again, like you're saying, try important. And I know that's kind of a sidebar, and trust me, we'll get to the other questions here. But it's like, I mean, for $5 a month, guys, if you want this, I mean, help us make it happen. Like, that's why we set this Patreon up, is to help us expand and maybe do some of the things we can. So until we get some of those subscribers, we are kind of just where we're at. And this is fine. If this is where we're at, I'm cool with that. Like, I'm enjoying it. But like you said, Joe, I think that's a great point, and I don't want to understate what you said, because I think you did a good job of kind of adding context to what we were talking about. That if we do have more people that subscribe and become members for $4.99 a month, that join our Patreon, our Pinfall membership, we are going to be able to do a lot more things, and we can reach a lot more people, and we can really kind of build this thing out a little bit more. But we need the Pinfall members. We need that to expand, and it hasn't expanded. And again, we're not crying. We're not, you know, it is what it is. I mean, we live in effect reality.
Yeah. So
here we
let's
go
get to our next question. And Nick, I'm going to ask you this one. It's from Gene Velasco of Matamidi.
Okay, I'm just going to get out.
Go ahead.
Well, I thought I would just mix it up a little bit.
Perfect.
Longtime fan from Minnesota here. I recall a guy back in the late 70s who is supposedly a graduate of Verne Gagne's training camp. He had some potential as a bad guy, but it seemed he left as fast as he came into the business. His name was Jan Nelson. Whatever became of him, and with all of the success Verne had with his trainees, were there any others that you can think of that just didn't cut it?
Let's take a look at Jan Nelson first. Jan, sad to say, let's cut to the chase right away. Passed away of a drug overdose, probably close to 50 years ago. He was a graduate of Verne Gagne's training camp, and he had potential. He was a damn good heel, kind of a mid-card guy. I believe he teamed up with Roger Kirby in the AWA area, but unfortunately, you know, it's, you know, even back then, Jan was one. Dennis Bockwinkel was another one that unfortunately overdosed. But Jan Nelson, yeah, all the potential in the world. But sad to say that story didn't play out very well. As far as the guys that Verne trained that did not make it, he trained, you know, 150 some wrestlers. Off the top of my head, I would say Laurent Soucy, first of all, great amateur wrestler, could not cut it as a professional, period. I don't know why, don't know if his heart wasn't in it or what. The other one that I would say absolutely was a surprise was Evan Johnson. Evan was a great wrestler at the University of Minnesota. He got into the business with a lot of hype.
Is that the guy that Pat Patterson did the whole thing at the theater?
That was the guy. He kind of
Okay.
picked on Evan. Evan was a legitimately great amateur wrestler. Teamed with Steve Olsenowski in the mid 1970s here in the AWA. But again, you have the mentality for the business or you don't. And you know, sometimes the amateur guys don't make that transition very well. Kurt Angle did. He made it extremely well. Unfortunately, Laurent Soucy and Evan Johnson did not. But thank you for the question. And yes, Jan Nelson had a lot of potential, but nipped in the bud too soon.
All right, let's get to question 3 here from Greg Sirota. Hi, guys. When the WWF held a card at the Met Center in the summer of '84, they used a ring that looked like an AWA ring. Did the ring belong to Verne, the WWF, or the building?
Wow. I don't know specifically the answer to that.
I didn't. Would a building own a ring and just kind of have it there?
No.
Okay.
I would. Yeah. To me, you know, it had to be a WWF ring. I can't imagine for the life of me, especially back in 1984, that Verne would say, "Yeah, we'll rent you the ring. Go ahead, run at the Med Center." Again, I don't have the absolute facts, but I would be surprised if it wasn't a WWF house show ring. You know, maybe they had a couple, 3 of them at the time, or maybe more than that they'd set up in the various cities, because they were running 2-3 shows a night, you know, with the roster that they had. But I can't imagine Verne would say, "Here, have our ring."
Yeah, highly doubt that Verne would have rented out or shared a ring with Vince at that time. My first thought was, you know, could he have gotten it maybe from another indie league? But in 1984, I don't know of another indie league in the area. It's not like it is today, where there's several, you know, in every state, I think. Everybody and their mother has their own wrestling.
You mean the indie outside of the AWA? Because that was obviously an indie.
Oh, yeah.
Nope, it was a territory.
Yeah, you run 3 states. You know, I mean, Eddie Sharkey's group, to my knowledge, didn't start till about 85, 86, Pro Wrestling America. So, yeah, to answer the question, pure and simple, it had to be their own ring.
Yep.
Okay. This one is also for both of you guys. Oh, thank you, Joe, for highlighting that. From Marty Kurth, one of our new Patreon members. By the way, thank you, Marty, for becoming a pinfall member. If you want to be cool like Marty, become a pinfall member. Yes. What are your favorite non-squash matches from All-Star Wrestling TV and why? Joe, you mentioned the Ventura and Adonis versus the Kenny J and Gadaski match. And Mick, I know that you've got one as well, but I know that's kind of one, Joe, that you were you've kind of talked about before.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the question said favorite non-squash match, but you know, when you've got Kenny J and George Scrapwire and Gadaski against Adonis and Ventura, Going into it, you'd say that, okay, this is going to be a squash match.
Right.
But it turned into something that was unexpected. Kenny J and George Scrap Iron Godasky suddenly looked like they could battle for the AWA Tag Team Championships. It, of course, didn't happen, and Ventura and Adonis, took care of things. But it was memorable because I didn't remember seeing George and Kenny tag before. I'm sure that they did, but to go against the East-West connection on All-Star Wrestling, it really felt like it was a match that could have happened at the St. Paul Auditorium or the St. Paul Civic Center back in the day.
If it's memorable and we're talking about it all these years later, that says it all. You know, there's how many tens of thousands of squash matches that appeared on TV, and, you know, the non-squash matches, I remember going back to the 60s. But yeah, when it sticks in your head and it led to something big, Adonis and Ventura were suspended after that, or as Wally said, you're suspended and true, not through, true. And they were gone.
By the way, I screwed up that question. I don't know what I was thinking. I screwed up that question so much.
No, you did. It's all good.
Live TV or live production.
What I would say mine, and again, because it led to something else, was the debut of Billy Robinson in the AWA in 1971. And he wrestled a man by the name of Kobayashi, who at the time was under the management of Stan Crusher Kowalski. And I love that old school shot. Marty O'Neill interviewing Stan and Kobe in the Twin Cities area. Nobody here had heard of Billy Robinson for the most part. He was huge over in Europe. He had a great reputation. But when he came here, they put him into TV as kind of a ringer. And, Kobayashi recognized him, and he's rambling on in Japanese. And, Stan is wondering what the hell's going on here. Well, they put Billy Robinson over on Kobayashi in Billy Robinson's debut here in the Twin Cities area. And it led to the extended run and huge success for Billy Robinson. So to me, very, very memorable. And look at that. All those years later, my friend Fumi Saito in Japan supplied this one. This is circa 2000. And that is the reunited late Kobayashi and the late Billy Robinson reuniting in Japan, the brotherhood of the business.
Chris, if you could do me a favor and put that early shot with Stan back up, besides the fact of bringing back so many memories of
which one did you want, Joe?
The one with Marty O'Neill, Kobayashi, and Kowalski. So if you look on the left side, right behind Marty O'Neill, I noticed being in production. These were the days of live television. There weren't live graphics, live lower third graphics onto it. So those strips back there, those would have the upcoming dates of wrestling shows in the area. So basically just, slide in another card and so forth. Talk about old school, talk about simple. It just, man, the memories just come flooding back. And the stuff that look at the stuff we're doing now. You're doing now, Chris. We got the lower third crawl. We've got the picture over a background. You couldn't do that shit in 1970, whatever this was. I just love
our low rate podcast would be cutting edge.
It certainly would. And Joe, you hit it right on the head. They put in the slot, Rockford, Illinois, give the date, and Stan and Kobe or Nick and Ray, whoever it was, would go out there and they would do their 2-3 minutes for the specific market. And that's the way, okay, let's move Rockford out of there. Now let's move in Moline. Let's move in Milwaukee. Yep. And it was just great. Great question.
I'm going to have to look. I'm not going to look at it the same now. Like I'm going to look at those old videos, and now I'm going to look at it completely different because I've always noticed it, but I never really understood it. So thank you for kind of giving me some context to that, Joe.
Well, when in an upcoming, I'm trying to think, it might be a few months, but when we go and do the best of the 70s, it has some of the early footage, and you will see the placards behind the interviewers. It's just, it's classic. I just, you know, great memories. You couldn't get by with it today, of course, with, you know, everything has to have a flash and a bang and a zoom and a twirl to it. But anyway, let's get on to the next question. This is going to be for you, Mick, from Blake Winovsky. There's no W in there. Winovsky. So we'll go that route. Whatever became of AWA light heavyweight champion Mike Graham? I know the answer, and it's not a good one.
It's not a good one. Mike Graham, who was basically an NWA guy. There he is, Mike on the left, his father, Eddie Graham, on the right. The real names actually were Edward Gossett Sr. and Jr. And Mike Graham came into the AWA in the mid-1980s. He was kind of in that mix with Steve Regal and Buck Zumhoff fighting over the light heavyweight championship. They billed Mike Graham as the light heavyweight champion. He was a heel, not the biggest guy in the world by any means. He was short in stature. He did not weigh a lot, but he was a great heel, great edge to him. Unfortunately, you know, they talk about the Von Erich tragedy. Eddie Graham Sr. had committed suicide several years ago, and sad to say, his son Mike Graham followed suit, you know, several years after that. So you never know what's happening with people. You never know what is going on behind the scenes in their mind. But sad to say, Mike Graham was a great talent. If you look up the Florida NWA stuff, Southeast United States in the 70s and the 80s, he was big time. And kind of in and out here in the AWA area, kind of a spot appearance, but tragedy again.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to work with Mike in the later years when we were doing the pay-per-views. He and Dusty had co-hosted 3 pay-per-views for Classic AWA Wrestling, all based on Florida Championship Wrestling. This is after we had sold the AWA library already, and Mike contacted us and asked us if we'd be willing to do 3 of them. So we did. But my time working with them, it was great. Go along with what you said, Mick. You just never know. And, you know, maybe we use this as a spotlight on, you know, suicide prevention. I mean, you need help, you know, seek it out. Or if you think somebody needs help, step in before it could possibly be too late.
You know, it's funny because I this morning as I was trying to get my coffee and I saw some of the questions and I knew this one was going to come up. It was like, you know, it's never a bad thing to check in on your friends. Even if if I see something with one of my friends, you know, because, you know, everybody's going through things, right? It's okay to check in and say, hey, how are you? Absolutely. Because I feel like sometimes people just need to feel like somebody's listening. Just be there when you feel like you're isolated and alone. That is when you can get into the, you know, some of those dark thoughts and you can overthink and get into your own head. So just always check in on one another and just be good to one another, because that's what we need in society.
Well said, buddy. Well said.
All right, let's go to for both of you guys from Tim Clace. Hopefully I said that correctly, Tim. Does anyone else think that the Mongolian Stomper the Sheik hired was a joke? Mick, I guess I'll let you go first.
He was not a joke by any means. He was in the twilight years of his career. Archie Goldie, the late Mongolian Stomper. You know, he came in as part of Sheik's army, you know, which kind of expanded to John Nord and Boris Zukov and, you know, whoever else. Archie Goldie, the Mongolian Stomper, had a fantastic career, particularly in the southern United States. When he got out of wrestling, I believe he became a sheriff in one of the towns south of here. But great heel, portrayed the Mongolian madman to the hilt, main evented everywhere he went. He was not unlike a John Tolos, who had a tremendous career and reputation, but by the time he got to the AWA, his best years were way behind him. And I think that was the case with Mongolian Stomper. He still delivered. He wasn't a bad wrestler, not a bad addition to Sheik's army. But again, twilight years of his career, but no, far from being a joke.
Definitely not a joke. The other ingredient into that was the time of the AWA. So you take somebody who is on the end of their career, combine that with, sadly, the state of the AWA at the time, which, I mean, it was, let's see, Archie came, I believe
it had to be like 85-ish.
I want to say 86, because I started in October of 85 and he wasn't here yet. Okay. And so I want to say it was early to mid 86 when he came. And the downslide, the trajectory on the AWA, you know, from 84 and then 85, 86, you know, it started to go down at that point. So you take both of those factors into account, and, you know, he wasn't over. You could maybe throw in the fact it could have been like a Pedro Martinez type of a thing where he wasn't over. Many factors, but 100% agreeing with you, Mick, no. The Mongolian Stomper was not a
Just
joke.
say Pedro Martinez or Pedro Morales?
Pedro Morales. I'm thinking baseball.
Thinking Pedro Martinez. I'm like, man, who's your daddy?
Yes, Pedro Morales. Thank you for that.
Okay. I just had to, I was like, wrestling, baseball. What? Okay. I kind of figured that, but you know.
Oh, it is World Series time.
It is World Series time. Yeah.
By the way, here's an aside. There was another Pedro Martinez who was a promoter in Buffalo, New York in the 1950s and 60s.
Are you serious?
Yeah, and he actually brought Nick Bockwinkel in and gave him the name Roy Diamond.
Oh, that's where he got it.
Yes, that's where he got it, you know. And, you know, Nick was asked about that. I know we're going off on a tangent here.
Oh, my God. Way to save Joe's ass with this.
Yeah, no. Hey, that's right here.
My ass, but I made a mistake.
No.
That is a random pull.
Yeah.
Unlike some people, I can admit when I make a mistake. That's not a shot at the two of you.
I got it. Roy Diamond, by the way, when Nick was asked about the name Roy Diamond, he says, I don't care if they call me asshole, just sign my check. So, yeah, Pedro Martinez, Buffalo, New York. So there you go. Next question.
All right. This is for all three of us. I'll let you guys go first from Steve Sewell. Better big man, Jerry Blackwell or Van Vader?
I will say Jerry Blackwell, because, I mean, and Vader was great. He was a monster heel. There's no getting around it. I think if you look at the two of them, Jerry Blackwell had more dimension to him, more depth of character, I think, than Vader did. Vader was just a big monster. You knew every time out what you were going to get from Vader. And Vader was one of these guys, when he cut a promo, you never heard him whining about having to get into the ring with somebody, never making an excuse for a loss or whatever. He was all monster. Jerry Blackwell had that, yeah, you know, your promoter screwing me over and blah, blah, blah. Plus the fact that I'm just a huge Jerry Blackwell fan, but two great wrestlers, no doubt.
Blackwell, hands down for me. I worked with both of them. Vader started with, Greg Boyd.
Greg Boyd, yeah.
Former football players. They both came in at the same time to the AWA, and never had any problems with Leon. But finding out what he became behind the scenes. He wasn't very well liked in locker rooms and so forth, created issues where he went.
Yeah.
Jerry Blackwell didn't do any of those things. He was, as I've said on this podcast before, a true Southern gentleman. When you saw the heel version of Jerry Blackwell, and even when he turned babyface and he still had that hard, I'm going to kick your ass edge to him, behind the scenes, Jerry Blackwell was one of the nicest people I've ever met in this business. So for me, taking everything into account, Jerry Blackwell, hands down.
And I've got to go with Vader, just because I didn't see prime Jerry Blackwell, but I did see Vader. I didn't see Vader when he was here. My first experience with him was in Japan, and then I saw kind of what he did when he made it to WCW. So I can't go in terms of the AWA reference, and I mean, I can go off of what I see with Jerry Blackwell on video, but in terms of the impact that it made on me based on what I saw, Vader was a very dominant, scary individual. And however they portrayed him, I mean, none of the behind the scenes stuff, like we didn't know any of that. All I knew is that this was a big, bad motherfucker who was going to fuck people up, you know, get in, fuck people up, and leave. That's kind of what Vader did. And to me, at that point, and everything he did was believable. So I just kind of have to go with Vader just because that's my frame of reference.
You know what's interesting about that too, Chris? And you're right. He had the persona of a big, tough guy that nobody's going to screw around with. And then you think of his confrontation with Paul Orndorff in WCW, where Paul basically cleaned his clock. And then Stan Hansen, you know, the literally pulling the guy's eyeball out of his head. But Vader was a big, tough guy. I think he was just a little less sympathetic of a character than Jerry Blackwell was, especially when Jerry turned babyface. But again, two absolutely at the top of the big man listing in wrestling.
And I never heard any stories of Jerry being too stiff. Now, there were matches, you know, like against Brody, where they laid shit in there. But Vader, to me, Vader believed too much in his character and was pretty well known for being stiff inside.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought the stories that I've heard were like he went in there and he didn't let up. Like he didn't have any of those light punches. Like he was really, really heavy.
You can see it. You can see it on those tapes, especially if he was in the ring with the jobber.
Yep.
You know, they remembered that they got in the ring with Vader.
Not just because of the gear. Let's go to Mick. And for those that don't know, you can Google Vader and gear. That's also another urban legend. Maybe not so urban. For Mick, thanks for another great episode. Thanks to you, Mick and Joe. Any idea the career earnings for Sir Nicholas Bockwinkel in wrestling? He had to be a top draw wherever he went. This is from David Selensky.
Our friend David.
He's what we call a P1.
Absolutely.
And that's a good thing.
We're going back to the 70s and the 80s, particularly the 70s, when Nick was in his heyday. Here in the AWA, I've heard from more than one source that Nick at his peak was about $250,000 a year. And remember, this is back, 40 some years ago. And God, I love that picture of him. What exemplifies champion right there. About $250,000, give or take, which back in the day was massive. You turn that into today's dollars and cents. He was worth every penny. And remember, when Nick's in the AWA and he gets this opportunity to go to NWA as the world champion, he turns it down and decides to stay in the AWA because the money was that good. The dates were fewer. And it was a godsend for him. So anybody who says Verne Gagne was not a good payoff guy, not true at all. But yeah, so I'd say to answer the basic question, Dave, probably about $250,000, maybe $300,000 at his peak. That's what I would guess.
Yeah, and Verne was not cheap. He was known back in the day as being one of the best paying promoters. Were there issues on payoff? Of course. You put any two people in a room, they're going to have conflicts and issues. But in general terms, no, Verne was known back in the day of being a good payoff. So that explains why Nick and many others want to stay here. Hell, even Bobby in the 1984, you know, when he didn't want, Bobby Heenan, when he didn't want to leave, well, he was getting paid pretty damn well here.
Yeah, very much so.
All right, let's go to the next one from Mark Matsu, and I know that's not your full name, Mark, but that's what came up in the email, so I know that that's not just kind of a shortened one. But here's your question. This is for you, Mick. How did you go about submitting your kind of a follow up there? How did you go about submitting your Bockwinkel Brigade bulletin to the Wrestling Review and the Ring Wrestling back then? That's this is a good question.
Pony Express?
Yeah, Pony Express. You know, it
Smoke Signal?
Back in the day, if you ran a fan club, and wrestling fan clubs today are basically unheard of. I mean, nobody talks about them, but back way before the internet, wrestling magazines were the vehicle, and wrestling correspondence via snail mail was another vehicle. The wrestling magazines, there's one. This was Wrestling Review, and Don Wilson, who was also the president at the time of the Wrestling Fans International Association, kind of a governing body of wrestling fans, ran that particular fan club column. Also, another one, the Ring Wrestling fan club column, was put together and edited by our good friend Tom Burke. God, Tom has done everything in the wrestling business. So you're back in the 1960s, 1970s, and in order to authenticate that you had a fan club bulletin, you had to provide a permission slip that was signed by your honorary, Nick Bockwinkel. They had to see a copy of that he gave you permission to run the club in his honor. And
well, that would almost be like impossible for someone, right? Especially if it's a heel.
Yeah,
because because of kayfabe, like you can't
absolutely.
Like that's damn near impossible.
You know, but that's what you had to do, whether you were a Bockwinkel or Bruno Sammartino or whatever. And I remember when I approached Nick on it, we had the whole discussion. Yeah, whatever you want, just don't bother me for any money or what have you. But there's a picture. This is 1983. That's one of the Bockwinkel Brigade bulletins that we call the Lean Mean Machine. Basically, so in essence, if you wanted to get your fan club promoted in a wrestling magazine, you submitted the permission slip and then a copy of your bulletin or your newsletter. You had to do it on a regular basis so they would keep promoting you. And that's the way it was back then. You couldn't blast it on the internet like we can today. So it took a while, took a couple of months by the time they processed everything. But boy, it was just delightful to see your name in that magazine alongside the name Nick Bockwinkel. So that's how it was done.
Serious question, Mick. So, I mean, we're talking about the 1970s. You've already said pre-internet. When you submitted the stuff, was it handwritten or did they make you have something that was typed out?
Are you talking about the bulletin itself?
Yeah.
Or the bulletin itself was typed, typically, 14, 15 pages on average. Back early on, it was the old mimeograph machine that stuck up the house at home. Then you took it to Kinko's. The permission slip itself had to be hand signed and handwritten by the honorary, so they knew it was authenticated. You couldn't just type up a form letter and say, I'm Nick Bockwinkel and I give Karsh permission to do this, and then forge his name. So it was all on the up and up, and they got to know you. They knew who the legit ones were and who the scammers were. And fortunately for me, Don Wilson and Tom Burke were great friends. So there you go.
Nice.
All right, let's go to the next one here from Katie Ramirez. This is for all three of us as well. Who do you think was better, Larry Hennig or Curt Hennig?
Oh God!
I'll let you guys start with this one too.
I think it's apples and oranges. I don't think that you can really. It's a generational thing. It's an era thing. It's a style thing. Larry Hennig was not flashy. You know, Larry referred to himself again as ground transportation. He was a big, tough guy. No nonsense. Started as a babyface, then turned heel, then went back to babyface. He's a 300-pound guy. He wasn't going to finesse you. In terms of personality and success in the business, Larry is a Hall of Fame guy as far as I'm concerned. Absolute Mount Rushmore in the AWA. Fast forward to Curt Hennig. Curt is a polar opposite in terms of style. He could do everything in the ring, including taking those hellacious bumps. The Mr. Perfect character, one of the greatest in the history of wrestling, as is Curt, or as was Curt, one of the greatest. So I honestly would say, I suppose on the overall impact, just because of the eras, you would have to go with Curt in terms of recognition. But I don't think, if you look at them individually for the time that they were in the business, they were both great.
These are one of those questions, you take any sport, you know, who is better, Babe Ruth or Hank Aaron? You're different, as you said, Mick, different times, different generations. The way I look at these is, okay, if I was going to start a wrestling league and take both in their prime, who would I draft first? For me, I would take Curt Hennig, but it would be a difficult decision. I'll have to admit that I'm biased because I worked a lot more with Curt. I was friends with Curt. I was friends with Larry as well, but I was closer to Curt. To me, Curt Hennig, as you again said, Mick, Curt Hennig to me is in my top 5 wrestlers of all time, and I'm talking overall talent, whether it was wrestling, being a second for somebody, doing promos, doing color commentary, doing the vignettes, which, you know, Larry never did. Wrestling just didn't do it back in the day. Curt was an incredible overall talent. All ribbing aside, which Mr. Perfect really loved to do, I'm going to go with Curt, slight edge over Larry.
And I have to go with Curt just again because I didn't see Larry outside of what I see on videos. One thing I do before I get into more of mine, look at that picture and how they're putting the hands on the hips.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the first thing that I noticed. I'm like, I mean, it's, if you don't think those guys are related just based on how they're standing, like that's incredible that, you know, how those two side by side. But to me, I saw Curt Hennig in the AWA, and then of course when he did the Mr. Perfect thing in WWF, and that was much more impactful on me than Larry Hennig. Now, you know, kind of like a lot of people in my age range that are now kind of, you know, through this podcast, hopefully are starting to realize all of the impacts that a lot of other people had. And I knew Larry Hennig had an impact on it and was such a pivotal part. But I have to go with Curt. But I do understand where you guys are, you know, saying, hey, it's very, very close between the two of them because you were able to at least see both of them in what they did. Again, for me, it's kind of like the Vader Blackwell thing. Yeah. I have to go with Curt just because of, I think people too, and it's so sad, right? That posthumously people are looking at Curt now being like, I don't think we really appreciated him when he was around for who he was. And it's a shame that it's 21 years later and people are, you know, we're talking about him like, God damn, I wish we would have been able to tell it to his face, like just how good he really was in the eyes of so many fans.
It's interesting that you say that, Chris. And for me, I feel the same way about Larry Hennig, posthumously. And again, I think it so much of it has to do with the way the sport is presented. Curt Hennig was part of the new generation and the glitz and the glamour of the business and the Mr. Perfect. And like Joe said, the vignettes and everything else, totally different from when Larry Hennig was working, where it was straight ahead, no nonsense, no frills wrestling. I will say this for Larry Hennig, one of the best heel interview promo guys ever. And if you have an opportunity, and I don't know how you're ever going to be able to because the footage is not there, to see Larry Hennig cutting a promo in his heel days, he was great. We talked about it before. AWA, Mount Rushmore, I would put Larry Hennig, not Curt Hennig, because Curt was not, his Hall of Fame career was after he left. Larry Hennig here in the AWA, absolute Mount Rushmore, but what a legacy.
That's
what
fair.
an absolute legacy.
Yeah, the legend of Mr. Perfect, and I've said it on the podcast before, started after Super Clash 2.
Yep.
And that was the beginning of what became Mr. Perfect. So let's get on to the next question. This is for you, Chris, from Norman Blazik. Norman says, I didn't grow up in AWA country, but I followed the promotion closely in the mid to late 80s. One of my favorite wrestlers back then was Wendy Richter. I know she was in the AWA for a brief time. Any possibility of getting Wendy on the podcast to talk about that short AWA stint?
I would love to get Wendy on.
Oh.
I think I'll let a lot of people think about Wendy, and thank you, Norman, for the question, that we kind of think of her as what she did in WWF and what the Black Spider with Moolah and not wanting to drop the title. And I feel like there's kind of this, bad blood that she's, that people have maybe towards her, which I think is also, unjustified. I would love to get her on and talk about what she did here. Even though it's a very short run, there's a lot that you can talk about with a very short period of time in a career. So I would love to find the contact information for Wendy Richter. I know that if you don't have it, Mick, I'm sure we know somebody that does.
I don't know if she has a Legends deal with WWE. I would doubt it, maybe because of the bad blood.
Yeah,
early on.
But I mean, with scrubbing Vince from everything, like maybe that's.
Well,
maybe
she's in their Hall of Fame,
Yeah.
She made their Hall of Fame, so maybe
she did.
all was forgiven. I would say I saw Wendy in the 1980s here as a heel, cowgirl Wendy Richter, and she was great. Oh my God, she was great.
One of those, she could work either one.
We saw it on Super Sunday.
Yeah, Super Sunday, and I tell you what, Wendy, one of the most beautiful ladies in person that you will ever see. Not only way back in the day. Some 40 years ago, but also Wendy today. We all age, but she looks terrific. And she does make some of these fan conventions be a great thing to have her on the show.
All right. We got a couple more questions here left before we wrap it up here. And if you guys do have a question at all that you want asked, don't put it on Facebook. Don't put it on YouTube. Email it. AWA Unleashed podcast at gmail.com, because I can copy and paste and I can take your name and I can put all of that. Otherwise, I got to go back through comments and just going through threads, and it's just very, very cumbersome. That is a very easy and quick way, and you will be in my good graces. Not like that really matters. I mean, some people just don't want to be in my good graces, and that's fine. Those are the people that can cruise on to something else. For you, Joe, from Tom Anderberg, as someone who worked at both venues in the declining years of the AWA, were the crowds bigger at the Showboat in Las Vegas or in Rochester? I like this question.
It depends. So in both venues, when we went to the Showboat to start doing our All-Star Wrestling and AWA Championship Wrestling on ESPN tapings, the crowds in the Showboat were as hot and as filled as any venue that I had worked. The buzz in that room during the Rosen Summers and Rockers run was absolutely incredible. And then, you know, you go into the same place month after month for a couple of years, and, you know, the attendance does this, and like the AWA, starts to have its decline. When we first went to the Mayo Civic Arena in Rochester, the crowds were really good. You know, it's like, hey, AWA taping. People still remember the AWA being in Minnesota, close to the Twin Cities, about an hour drive, so not that far. But the crowds in the beginning there were pretty good. And then the same thing happened. Just boom, 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 until suddenly you had a bunch of you still had a great crowd, but it was funny because most of the people were dressed like seats. The attendance declined on both of them. If I had to pick between the two venues, I'm going with the Showboat. The magic of Las Vegas, the just everything about the Showboat Pavilion back in the day when we sold out in the beginning days when we got there for the tapings. Absolutely phenomenal. Just my second favorite venue to work. The first, by the way, not AWA related. My favorite venue to work in for a pro wrestling arena, the intimacy, First Avenue, downtown Minneapolis.
Yes.
First Ave is really good. Oh, that's a great venue.
Love there. Ran several shows there in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s. Absolutely love that venue.
Great venue.
Alrighty.
All right, let's go to the last one. And I realized, guys, that I did not put up pictures of Wendy Richter. So
let's put them up now. We got time. She's worth it.
Well, I just deleted the pictures, but okay, I'll go back and I'll put them in.
Get Wendy back up there on another time, you know.
Okay, well, I've already put the pictures back in queue, so I'll go back. So you guys go back and resell. Talk about Wendy Richter.
I tell you what, while you're getting that ready, I will get the next question.
There we go.
No. You can't talk about the next question if I don't put the correct picture. I mean, that would be kooky talk.
A formatted show.
Wendy back in the day, and that's the Cowgirl Wendy Richter stage. Early 1980s, absolute knockout. Let's put that other picture of Wendy up there right now, and you're going to see what I mean. And, not to, belabor somebody's looks, but that's Wendy today, and she still looks absolutely gorgeous. And I can tell you, having met her, great personality. She's a great spokesperson for the business. And let's somehow try to get Wendy Richter on the show. There you go, Joe.
That I would love that. Let's do our last question. And this one is for you, Mick. It's from Marty Levy. I'm sorry, I read this question and I have to chuckle. Of all of the supposed Soviet wrestlers who main evented in the AWA over the years, were any of them actually from Russia?
Wow.
I didn't get it. You were on full screen when you were doing that, Joe.
Yeah,
you're a bobblehead. You're a bobblehead.
Nope.
Well, the three-letter answer would be yes. The two-letter answer would be no. I'm going with the shorter answer. If we can, Chris, have you got some of the pictures of the notorious Soviet wrestlers over the year that we might be able to put up on screen? Let's start with the Kalmykov brothers. That's Karl Kalmykov and Ivan Kalmykov. Karl's real last name, I can't even pronounce it for you. But no, he was not from the Soviet Union. Ivan Koloff, I believe, or Ivan Kalmykov, I believe.
You mean it wasn't Kalmykov?
Was hard to believe. His actual real last name, I had it. I know in some circles he was called Edward Bruce. I think it was shortened. He was born in
Bruce
Pennsylvania.
Kalmykov, same thing.
Yeah. He was born in Pennsylvania, moved to Detroit. So no, the Kalmykov brothers, the notorious Russians, who were in at a time when the U.S. wrestling fans were still fighting the war that had ended about 15 years earlier. They were not Soviets. Let's take a look at the. We got some more, I know, legitimate Russian superstars. There you go. That would be Boris Zukov and Soldat Ustinov. Boris Zukov, a.k.a. Jim Harrell, from Roanoke, Virginia. and Soldat Ustinov from Moscow via the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. My friend Jim Lanning, believe it or not, no, they were, the hammer and sickle aside, they were not authentic Russians. Do we have any more that fit the bill there?
I think we got a couple more to throw up here.
I know. I my whole my whole timeline now is full
Want to
of.
hear about your hole, Chris?
Don't worry about the timeline. Let's take a look at another guy. There you go. Oriol Paris, from Canada, transformed miraculously into Ivan Koloff. Of course, before that, Oriol Paris became Red McNulty, and then he became Ivan Koloff. But no, he also was not a hated legit Soviet. So there's a pattern here. That is Nikolai Volkov. When he was here in the AWA area, he wrestled as Boris Brezhnikov. He was Croatian. I don't believe he spent a day in Moscow. But whether he was Brezhnikov, Koloff, either way, he had the off at the end of his names. But he was not a legitimate Russian either. So the pattern continues. Oh, my. Gotta love wrestling. There you go.
These are the hardest ones because these are what I call the Robbinsdale Russians.
Oh, my God. At least with Nikita Koloff, Scott Simpson from Robbinsdale, Scott legitimately changed his name to Nikita Koloff. So at least in name, he became a full-fledged Russian again. It's well documented. He's from Robbinsdale, Minnesota. So again, no, you did not have it's almost mind-boggling, and it's scary to believe that we believe this shit, especially when we were younger. Have we got one more there?
We do. I will never look at Nikita Koloff and not remember the John Nord story.
Oh,
where they're he pulls up and he's like, oh, keep kayfabe or something, and then Nikita pulls up and John's like, hey, Scotty, and he's just like, son. I don't know. I'll always remember that from John Nord, and of course,
keep you humble.
Yes, that's it.
There we go. There it is, right there. Chupik's Nightmare. That is our friend Barry Darsow. Look at him. Now, would you believe that this guy was a notorious Crusher Khrushchev Russian? No. Barry Darsow from Robbinsdale, Minnesota. One of my favorite people in the wrestling business, public enemy #1 for Joe Chupik. Why don't you be a big shot here, Chupik? Why don't you go on there right now before we go and tell him he's a fake Russian, he's a fraud, he's from Robbinsdale, he's this and that, and the Demolition were Road Warrior knockoffs. Go ahead.
Why? You just said it for me.
No, I got quotes on either side. I just want to be, careful about that. But yeah, so we had a list of wrestlers there.
Have there ever been like as many foreign wrestlers imitated as the Russians? Like, it seems like people are just like, out of all of them, it seems like, well, let's just pick somebody, call them a Russian, and there's our heel.
The Japanese and the Germans, especially during the war era, there was a lot of supposed Japanese that were actually Filipino or Hawaiian, came to the United States as Japanese, and the Germans. Look at Fritz von Erich, Jack Atkinson from Dallas, Texas. It's hard to believe that in the world of wrestling, the straight up no nonsense sport that this is, that you cannot straighten there. You can't cast any dispersions on the world of wrestling. But
there is one other AWA Russian who was not Russian, Chris Markov. He was from Yugoslavia.
Yeah. Well, sometimes he was. When he first appeared here as Harry Madison, he was from Belle Plaine, Minnesota. Then he was Chris Markov from Skopje, Yugoslavia. That's right, Chris. Harry Madison.
Harry Madison from Belle Plaine.
That's correct.
Oh my God! I next time I'm like at work, I'm just gonna, when we get a text, I'm just gonna say, "Hey, this is from Harry Madison in Belle Plaine."
It could very well be too.
Oh my God, that's so good.
Harry Madison, and then he became Chris Markov from Skopje, Yugoslavia, and then at some point he moved to Russia, which he became, of course, his famous, the Russians is coming, they are here. Well, boy, that was fast. Oh, God love Chris. Welcome to the wrestling, folks. There you go.
Oh, gosh. All right, let's give some shout outs and take it home. The shout outs are coming. Can you say that?
The shout outs are coming. They are here. That good old Russian from South Dakota, Mark Royer, gets my shout out this week. Mark is a dedicated AWA fan, watches the podcast. Love Mark, and shout out to you, buddy.
My shout out goes to a new follower of AWA Unleashed on our Facebook page, that infamous Russian Timothy Sprandel.
And
hello, Tovarich.
Mine goes to the dastardly, evil Russian Drew Murphy.
Oh boy! If there's a Russian name, Murphy is it, pal.
I mean, Murphy.
Nothing says Russian more than a Murphy.
Murphy off. Murphy off.
Oh boy!
Here we are. We've now gone full offensive. You know what?
Hey, if you can offend anybody or be offensive about anybody nowadays, it's the Russians.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, guys, if you want to be offended more, sign up for our Patreon at $4.99 a month. It offends us if you don't sign up, but please sign up, because we can do more. We can talk about more offensive Russians. We can talk about more offensive Germans or more offensive gimmicks or whatever. I mean, I don't know. We can talk about pretty much anything.
Nothing says offensive more than this podcast.
Yeah, that's true.
This is
if you do sign up, or when you sign up for our $4.99 a month, if you add an off to the end of your name, we'll give you a break. We're only going to charge you $4.99.
The discounts are coming,
and that's
here.
It's not in rubles.
Hey, and before we go, don't forget Chris Markov's threat to the Crusher. Back in the day, Crusher, for every kick and for every punch, I'm going to give you double.